Hello, everyone. We are on section 8.6 here that deals with cars. And within that topic, which typically is the second largest investment that you would make, right behind a home. And so within that topic, we're going to be talking about financing cars, leasing cars, and if you were to purchase, whether it would be new or used, and just the different topics along that line. So we're going to start out with the first topic in this section in your book called The Mathematics of Financing a Car. And I know there's calculators to do all this and so on online and all that kind of stuff, but this is a math class, and so we're going to talk about the math of the formulas. And actually the formula for this is derived from the last formula that we were using for annuities. And so it looks, this is the annuity formula, and the formula we're going to use for car calculation, for the payment calculation, is essentially that annuity formula solved for the PMT part, which stands for payment. And we're actually going to substitute that out and make it P for the A on the other side once we do solve it. So we could do all the algebra of mixing all those things around and so on, multiplying both sides by R over N, and then dividing by A, and doing lots of different steps, but this is what it comes out to be. And so the payment, which is what we're trying to calculate, the monthly payment for a car loan, and it could be any kind of interest loan, ends up being this calculation. P, the principal amount, times R over N, which R is the rate, just as it was before, N is the number of times it's compounded, over, and this gets a little bit complicated down here, the entire quantity, 1 minus, and then what you're subtracting from the 1 is 1 plus, again, that R over N, all raised to a negative power, which is actually going to flip it up on top when we talked about negative powers. N is, again, the number of times it's compounded, and T is the time that the loan is for. And so we're going to look at an example of this, but that's our formula that we're going to be doing the mathematics on in this particular section. Okay, so let's look at an example. So this, I believe, is an example out of your book. Find the monthly payment for a $20,000 car at 7% interest for 3 years. Now, first of all, again, I'm just using an example in your book, but if you're paying 7% interest on a car loan, you're paying way too high now. Again, when this book was written, maybe when it was written, but I'm not sure they updated all these things. I recently purchased a car and I got 1.99% financing. It's possible to get 0% financing. It's it's all over the map, and so it just depends. 3 years might not be your optimal time frame for a car loan, and we'll talk more about that. But anyway, that's the example that we're going to look at here. So we're just going to plug into the formula. So we're trying to find the monthly payment, and so we're going to take the $20,000 purchase price, and we're going to multiply it by that R over N. I'm just plugging into that formula that was on the previous slide. R over N, so R, our interest rate is 7%, so we convert that to a decimal, and so we move the decimal over 2 places, 0.07, and N is 12 because it's compounded monthly, or it's a monthly payment, and so that's how many payments we make in a year. Okay, all that is going to be over, that's the formula, 1 minus and 1 plus, those are constants, so you're not plugging anything in there. And then again, we're putting in our R over N, so it's the same as the top, 0.07 over 12. And then we're going to raise that, remember, to a negative power of N times T. So our N, again, is 12, and the T, it said in the problem, is 3 years. So there's plugging in all the different pieces of information for this particular problem into that formula. Okay? Now, this is kind of complicated to plug into your calculator. And so you could potentially do that all in one string of keys. You'd really have to know what you're doing with your calculator, though. That would take some parentheses several times and so on. So we're going to break this up instead. We're going to do some parts. And the only problem you have when you break up a problem like this, doing it on a calculator, is that when you write down or store in the memory these different steps along the way, you just have to carry it out to lots of decimal places so that you're not rounding in a huge way in the middle of the problem somewhere. because we're going to be looking at some pretty large numbers in the process of this calculation. And so you just have to be careful there. So my example here, I'm taking it out lots of decimal places just as an example. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is calculate that numerator. And so if we multiply 20,000 times, on your calculator here, 20,000 times 0.07 divided by, or that's what the line in a fraction means, divided by 12, and then hit equals, it should come out to, it's really 116 2/3. And so as we talked about repeating decimals and so on, 2/3 ends up being 0.66666666 forever, but because your calculator sees the next 6, it rounds it up to 7 on your calculator display. And so 20,000 times 0.07 divided by 12 is 116.666. Okay? Now let's start looking at the denominator. We're going to have to break that up into some pieces here. Okay? So let's do just those parentheses raised to the power first. Okay? So we're going to take 1 plus 0.07 divided by 12. And actually 0.07 divided by 12 is that 0.0058333. And then when you add 1, of course, it just puts 1 in front of it. Okay? Then we're going to raise that number, the entire parentheses is that 1.05833. We're going to raise that number to the negative 12 times 3 power. So let's go ahead and simplify that power. Negative 12 times 3 is negative 36. And so that's what it ends up being simplified. And so let's go ahead and raise that to that power. And so that's approximately 0.81107,895, so on. Okay? And you can be checking this on your calculator as you go. And so that quantity, they actually want to subtract from 1. So that 1 is out in front, 1 minus that entire quantity. So if we do that, we get 0.18892,104. Again, I told you I took these, in fact, my iPhone calculator has lots of decimal places, and so I just wrote them all down. Okay? And so if we take that subtraction, it equals that. And so now our calculation ends up being the numerator, the 116.66667, divided by that denominator, the 0.18892. And so that's our final calculation here. And it ends up being approximately equal to 617.5419, and it goes on forever. But the question here, remember, is find the monthly payment. And so I know this is money. And so as long as I can round to the nearest cent, I really don't even have to take it as far as I did, but as long as I can round to the nearest cent, then that's all I need to do. Really all I needed was that 1. I just need the next digit to decide if I have to round up or not. And so to answer the question, what is the monthly payment, find the monthly payment, it would end up being $617.54. So we answered the question, the original question in the problem. Okay, so some definite calculator steps there that you need to make sure you understand depending on what calculator you're using. Maybe you have like a TI-30 or a TI-83 or 84 or something like that, or just using your phone calculator. But even on a phone calculator, it depends on whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever. And so it just depends on the calculator how you plug all those things in terms of keystrokes and so on. So I have to let you kind of do that on your own. Okay? All right, so there's our example. And so that's the example talking about the math part of purchasing. Next we want to talk about, the next topic in your book is leasing. And this is actually a quote from Dave Ramsey. He calls it, "Leasing is fleecing." I would highly recommend, as he does, and lots of financial people do, that you stay away from leasing if you at all possibly can. And I don't know why you would have to take a lease, but you need to stay away from leasing. Here's many reasons why. Leasing, here's the definition of leasing a car. Leasing is paying a specified dollar amount over a set time period for the use of a product. Now that's the key part of that definition. Because you pay a specified dollar amount over a set time period to buy a car too, but that's not what this is. You are just using the product. So in this case, you're using the car over that time period. Leasing is renting. You are renting that car for a typically 3-year period. A typical lease is 3 years. And so you're just renting the car for that time period. That's it. Okay, so you need to understand that you never own the car within the terms of the lease. You can buy the car at the end of the lease by paying out what it's worth at that time, but the lease is not purchasing the car at all. Okay? So, except with a lease, there are many ways that it can cost you even more money. So, with a lease compared to a purchase, there are many more ways that a lease can cost you money. First of all, a lease it limits you on how many miles you can drive. Okay, and so if you go over those miles, typically I believe it's 15,000 miles a year. Which maybe if you just stay in town all the time or whatever, but if you go very far, then that adds up very quickly. And so if you go over that amount, you pay pretty substantially per mile at the end of the lease. And so that can get pretty heavy. Typically, a lot of times, there's a balloon payment at the end of the lease that you don't always know about. Residual value payments can be mixed up in a lease. And part of that has to do, again, kind of like a balloon payment, to where you owe money at the end of the lease, specifically if you want to keep the car. So if you want to keep the car, you then basically buy it from the bank or the leasing company, whoever it is. And so then, whatever they value it at, Blue Book value, and probably there's some other calculations in there for a lease. But then you can buy the car at the end after you've paid a monthly fee for 3 years just to use it. Okay. So advantages of leasing compared to disadvantages of leasing. The advantage of leasing is, yes, the payment. The down payment usually is much smaller. It kind of depends on your credit, though. Again, I just bought a car and didn't put anything down on it, and there's reasons for that, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But and so it just depends. But a lease typically has a smaller down payment than a purchase. Lease payments are less typically each month than our purchase payment, and because of that, you typically end up being able to get a nicer car for the same monthly payment. And so you basically up your game to really, in a way, get out of what you could afford typically if you were buying it. And so that just kind of ups everything, like the payments at the end and so on. But that's an advantage. You can get a nicer car for the same monthly payment you would be paying if you purchased a car. When the lease is over, you don't have to worry about selling the car or anything else. You just hand it right back over to the dealer that you leased it from or the bank that you leased it from or whatever. They just take it and you're out looking for a new car. So, disadvantages of leasing: when the lease ends, you don't own the car. And usually it's an asset to you, right? You would be able to have that car to either sell, trade in for a new one, whatever, if you purchased it. But so it's kind of the opposite of that last advantage. You don't own the car at the end, and so you don't have a car at the end. Mileage limits are a major disadvantage. Okay? After mileage costs and so on, usually a lease ends up being more expensive than if you purchased a car. Even though the monthly payments typically end up being less, but because of that mileage thing in there and so on, the balloon payments, some other things, it usually ends up being considerably more expensive to purchase. While leasing, you are responsible for any damage to the car. And so you would need to, obviously if you have an accident or whatever, your insurance is going to cover that, but any other, just smaller damage, you're responsible for that. Tears in the seats or, whatever. You would have to have that fixed when you return the car at the end of the lease. Leasing does not cover maintenance. Obviously, you would have to keep the car maintained and so on, as you do purchasing, but just so you understand that. And there are penalties for ending the lease early. You typically can't, but of course, financial. But you would pay significantly for that. You would basically pay all the depreciation on the vehicle plus penalties. And so, there's a few more disadvantages, but not just number, not just one-to-one correspondence, but the disadvantages are much heavier than the advantages to a lease. And so if you want, in the middle, I put a link to a couple videos, I think it is, one specifically from Dave Ramsey talking about leases. And you can look on his YouTube channel and so on and see lots of where he talks about leasing. And it's called fleecing because you just get ripped off on a lease. And so you can watch those if you choose to. That's just what I said. So I'll put those links in the middle shell, and you can check on those. And you don't have to watch those. They're just kind of life lessons in this area. So, okay, so if you are going to purchase, what are the advantages, or what, comparing brand new car to used car? And I'm sure some of you have heard some of these things, but the average new car loses 12% of its value when you drive it off the lot. And so as soon as you drive that car off the lot, you can't sell it for what you paid for it by any means. If something changed in your mind, or whatever, and so you do have to be careful with that. This is the average new car. That's what we're talking about here. Okay. Because of the nature of who we are anymore, especially as consumers in the U.S. and just our kind of, especially, I'm going to be this way, younger people and so on, they just want to move from car to car in terms of, they get a raise at work, and so they're going to convert that up to a, nicer car, and they can afford a bigger payment, so they're going to go get a new car, whatever it might be. Some of these would be even leases. Somebody leases a car for 2 years, and so they got to go get a new car. And so you could possibly purchase that leased car, and so on. And so you can find, 1 or 2 year old cars out there in pretty much any make or model that you like. And just because their owners wanted something different, there's not necessarily anything wrong with them. Of course, you have to have that checked out. But you can get a great deal on a 1 or 2 year old car anymore in our economy, because people just want to switch to something else. They get tired of one car, they move to another. And so buying used can save you a significant amount of money. And if it's only 1 or 2 years old, many banks, credit unions, will still give you the same interest rate for buying it as they would a brand new car. So the cost of borrowing that money can not be very high. And you just need to understand, cars are just expensive items. They just are. They're expensive to buy. They're expensive to run, gas, oil, maintenance, to insure it. Our insurance for all 4 of us and so on, and especially having a male, less than 25 in our family, it's just crazy what we pay for car insurance. To register each one of them with DMV and get them smogged and all that stuff, and obviously to maintain, to keep the brakes and the engines running, and just everything that needs to be done to keep them maintained, tires, all that kind of stuff. And so you just kind of need to go in with that. If you need a vehicle to get to work and to get around and so on, it's just going to be a cost. And so you just need to do the best you possibly can to keep that cost as limited, within your budget as you possibly can. And it's a challenge. Vehicles are just expensive. They just are. There are options a little bit more now. And so there are alternatives to this. As I mentioned, I did just buy a car. I happened to buy an electric car. And it fits me perfectly for my particular commute. And I would think an electric car would be pretty handy if you just stuck around in town also. But I have a 50-mile commute each direction. It takes me about an hour to get to work each way. And part of it is because I'm going downhill for half of it, although going uphill really racks the power. But I get recharged on the way down partly. And so an electric car, really the only thing that you maintain on an electric car is the brakes, which you don't use very often because there's another way of braking and slowing down the car, using an electromagnetic magnet on the drivetrain and so on. And so brakes and tires are pretty much all that you maintain on an electric car. And so that maintenance is way down. Actually, registration is a little bit less. I was amazed because I bought a fully electric car. I got a little over $14,000 in rebates and tax refunds that I just applied to the cost of the car. And so that reduced the payment by $200 a month by just putting all those refunds and so on back on it. And so it's working out great for me. It's not for everybody, but it's working out great for my scenario and so on. And so it has cut down on some of those expenses. My gas bill before that was a little over $500 a month. And gas has gone up since then, so it'd be even more. And so it's been a good decision for me. But again, not for everybody. And so lots of decisions to make about cars and so on. Again, for what we're doing in class, Some of the math there is working with that formula and just mainly being able to plug into that formula and so on, very similar to the last section, just kind of rotated around. And so hopefully you can do the homework out of this section now.